when you study geology and paleontology, you see fossils everywhere. You see fossils everywhere in the whole world, in the whole globe. You see fossil, and you see in the top of the mountains, and you see really deep in the sea. It confirms what the Bible says, that it was a global flood and not a local flood. Okay, so how am I going to apply what happened, apply and understand what happened in the flood and what I see now? So here, for example, you have the Rodinia. Rodinia was the big continent, the first one that got created right there. So what happened during the flood, it was the breakup of that continent, the big continent. There was only one continent, the big one, it broke. And during the flood, they get together again in the Pangea, and then they start breaking apart again in this transitional period for what we have today. So how people come up with the idea that those continents were together millions and millions of years ago. What happened is those continents, they are separating very, very, very slowly today. So what they do is, well, if they have this speed, how they would be together once. So they take these math and they do like millions of years. They were all together. What we see is, and that's a different way of seeing, and again, that question that I asked you about, there's another way of interpret that data is what? It's just like in a car. When you go driving really, really fast and you have to brake, you have to stop, what's going to happen to the car? The car's coming really, really, really fast, and then he's going to stop slowly. He's going to start slowly stopping. So what we see today is this slow stop, slow motion, slow movement of those continents because they were very, very fast during this transitional period during the flood. And one thing that we see in the flood as a result of the flood, it's fossil. That's what I study, paleontology. And when you look at the fossil, I don't know how many of you had the chance to study fossils or just to see fossils, go to the museums. They're just perfectly preserved. They are beautiful. So how can I understand those layers of the fossils that we're going to find with the thing that happened that the Bible talks about? So again, we have the Rodinia is the proposed pre-flood supercontinent. It's the big continent that God created. And you're going to have that in the area, the Precambrian. So when you have the flood, you can see in the picture there, waters of the deep come forth, global flood begins. So now you have the Paleozoic and then the Mesozoic. And then when the waters recede, the flood ends, the global flood ends, all the water recedes. Now you have the Cenozoic, and then you have the Ice Age, that it's one of the consequences of the flood. So this is how we can understand, and that's how we can see what happened during the flood with the things that we have today. So how long was the flood? How long ago was the flood? So the flood happened around 1656 years after Adam was created. So let's say 2,000 years. So if we have when we have 6,000 years as we have now, we have 4,000. So the flood happened 4,000 years ago, around 4,000 years ago. So that's one of the points. That's why we have fossils so well preserved. They still so preserved. And that's one thing that I just would like to mention with you. When I was studying during my master's at the American Museum of Natural History here in New York, United States in New York, I had one of the fossils that I was studying. I studied wasp and bees, and then one of the lady that worked in the museum, she saw the wasp and she was like, "Wow, it's so well preserved." I don't know how it got so well preserved for so many years. 120 million years, the fossils are dated through evolutionary ideas. And then I told her, I said, well, maybe it was not that long. Of course, I couldn't really go through a lot of things because I would get kicked out of the museum. So people that study fossils, when we see the preserved material there, we can understand that the flood, those are the result of the flood. So here, just for you to have an idea of all the details that the book of Genesis brings about the flood. There are 3 chapters with all that information: the days, the month, what happened. It's a lot of details for you to just think that it's not global, or it's local, or it's calm, or there's some ideas that it's also saying, well, the Bible is not even talking about the flood. The Bible is talking about something else, but it's not a flood. So that's why we don't have to worry about geology, paleontology, because the Bible doesn't talk about that. So what is the size of the ark? I don't know if you at UK use feet. In Brazil, we use meters. So I had meters there, but then I took them out just because I didn't know what would you see. So it's around 37 feet long, 73 feet wide, and 44 feet high. That's the size of the Bible. And how we come up with that? Well, we come up with this because of the number of cubit. So the number of cubit, the size of a cubit, it would change with the culture, because the size of it goes from the size of these fingers here through here to here. So depending on the culture, they would have a different size of cubit. So if we go to the medium one, the common short that we have, which is 18, that's the number that we can come. So they have the Hebrew, they have the Babylonian, they have the Hebrew long, they have the Hebrew short, and so on with the size. So also God told Noah that it would have 3 compartments. And here, just for you to have an idea, the size. I don't know how many of you have come here to see the ark. So if you have a human right there, that's the size of the ark that it was built. Dr. Terry was talking a little bit about the ark capacity, and then I just would like to show a picture showing that around only 20% was filled. So for the size of the ark, if you put it like this, that's what you have. Or if you put it like this, horizontal, that's how you have. So you don't have a big problem capacity, because that's really, really easily solved with the amount of the animals, the created kinds that were there around 1400. So you have a lot of space, a lot of room for those animals and for people and for food. So it wasn't a problem at all. Let me see here the time. So here we have what is the created kind that we always talk about? This created kind, they're not, of course, we cannot have them today. So what we have is just the change in these created kind when we study taxonomy, and actually what the word that is used in Latin when it was translated from Greek says species or genus. But when you go to check the definition of the word species and genus that they mention, fits with the word family. So that's why when we do raminology, you go with the level of family in the taxonomy, and it can go a little bit higher in order. It can go a little bit down in genus and sometimes in species, but it's mainly in family that it fits, and that's from we have the idea and also what the word in Hebrew means. So, for example, here when you see the dog kind, we know that dogs that we have today, it comes from the wolf. So you didn't need to have different types of dogs inside of the ark. If you had just the wolf, you're gonna have the whole group of dogs later. So that's the idea. Here, for example, cats. The cat kind, you have all of this diversity of the cat kind that you had, and all come from they're all from the same family. So if you have a created kind in the level of family at the inside of the ark, after when it leaves the ark, it can reproduce all of those diversity of animals. We have the horse kind too, and we have, for example, also dinosaurs. We have the families here, the raptor kind. It's around only 80 dinosaur kinds that we have today. So here, some of the numbers saying how many of the animals we think through the numbers that we can have that it were inside of the ark. So here's 7,000, around 7,000 less. And when you go to families, that's the number 938. But if you're gonna expand that number, you can go until 1,400. And then some of you can be like, oh, well, we're hearing so many numbers here and there. That's an estimation. We're going through this estimation, and most of the time we try to go a little bit higher just to show that we're not using the smallest number to fit in our interpretation. No, we're going to the highest one, because even when you go to the highest number, you don't have a problem. As the study that it was done at UK, it was showing that even like if you put 70,000 animals inside of that ark, it wouldn't be a problem. So when people bring up the idea of the number is too many for the ark, that's not a very good argument. It doesn't work. And here a little bit of the countdown here, around 55 to 75 years now, the number a little bit more precise. That's the estimate too of the number, how long it took for Noah to build the ark. And now just showing you a little bit about the consequences of that flood. And one of the consequences is the ice age. When we go to study the generations post-flood, that's what you see. And when you match that information, what we have in the field, that's what we can find. That here, Babel, and here, you can see, let me go back here. You can see right here, the first generation post-Babel, you can see just a tiny little bit of starting the ice age, and the high level of the ice age, it's around the third post-Babel generation. So we only have one ice age, and that was after the flood. Now I just would like to separate some facts from interpretation. And again, what is a fact? What is the evidence or interpretation? So the fact is the data with no interpretation, but just a little bit. And the evidence or interpretation is the data with that worldview. So let's just apply some of the things that we see here. So when you see a fossil, what you see is a fact. The fossil, it's a fact. The 65 million years is just interpretation. We don't find any fossil with labels at all. So when we see layers here, it's the Grand Canyon, that's the fact. The interpretation is the idea of millions of years. When you see Lucy, for example, the bones are the fact, and here is the interpretation. As you see, there is no eye bones preserved right there, not even the color. So how do they know how the color of the animal is? Right there, they're just applying the interpretation. They have human eyes, not ape eyes. Even when you look at the bones, you see that it was an ape, not a human. So let's analyze some paleontological evidence. We're talking about the flood. We know that the fossil comes from, it's a result of the flood. Most of them are a result of the flood. And now we're going to see and analyze some of those evidence. So normally when we see a dinosaur, what do we think about it? Oh, we think that they found the whole dinosaur complete and beautiful. I wish we could do that, but it's not actually what happened. So here, the green part, it's what was found. And from that, they draw the whole other thing. That's what happens. This is the Angaturama limai. Both Santana Raptor and Angaturama limai, they're from the area where I'm from. And what you see is only those little green part that was found. Here we have this one that has 46 feet. Only 3 bones were found. But this one is my favorite. Only those tiny little bones were found, and this one has 56 feet. If you do meters, just multiply that by 3. So you have this, and it's just crazy how that works. So here, when you have Nebraska man, they only found 1 tooth. They found 1 tooth, and from that 1 tooth, they drew the man, his friend, which I don't really know it. They're friends because they're kind of looking weird to each other, where they lived and what they're doing. And what happened later was they found out that the tooth was from a pig. It's not even human. So the problem is in the paleontological field, you don't have many paleontologists. So when they find something, they want to be famous, they want to be known. So they just go ahead, they do what they need to do just to publish the paper, just to throw it there. And sometimes they don't even go through the right process, or they skip some of the process that you need to do when you're writing a paper. So again, here, this is what they found. This is the whole interpretation that they come up. And then when we talk about grandma that we talk about, it's Lucy. So this book was published in 1990, and Lucy, the beginnings of humankind. And then you have the knee. The knee joint is human. The knee joint is human. And what is the problem with the knee? The knee was found 1 year earlier in 80 meters, 240 feet, if you do feet there, not with the rest of the fossil. You can know how the hand and the feet are if you have the structure of the bones. Here you don't have all the structures of the bones preserved. You see that there's no hand, there's no feet. It wasn't found. What they bring is this idea in the museums. Look at the hands, look at the feet, look at the eye. None of those information are in the fossil record. None of that. And how they come up with that, it's just interpretation. And you see more of that. When you actually go to study the bones, what you find, it's an ape. So when you go to Almanaleti to study them, this is the artistic way of them how they put the fossils into something artistic. You can see that there's a lot of difference between human and apes. The cavity of the brain is different. The teeth are different. The bones are curved that they found. And human, we don't have curved bones. Only apes that sway in trees do. Here's the difference between the feet of a human and an ape. And the researcher that did the research, he said, I believe that those bones look like a fossil from 2 to 2.5 million years ago. When he actually did he date the material, it came around 236 to 335,000 years old. So there's nothing to do with the age that he was thinking. So what we see is the evidence. They don't really support evolution. When you go and study deep the evidence, when you analyze the interpretation there, you see that they do not support evolution. They actually confirm creation. They confirm what the Bible is saying. When you go, for example, when you see papers, and this is not, oh, you're just picking one. No, you have tons of those papers. You see, here's this later deposit were deposited much more rapidly, accumulated in days by rapid sinking. These, for example, here in Mount St. Helens, you see a lot of material that was deposited in only 3 hours. So you see this, you have a human there just to compare in only 3 hours that all material was deposited here. And look at this. I don't know if you're going to see, but all the layers are very well on top of the other. They're all on top of the other. And you see the same thing happening right here in Argentina. So what happened? You see this happening when you do that in the lab. That happens when it's a rapid deposition, when it's a fast deposition. It's how you're going to see those layers like that. One time I was in the field with a colleague, and then he's not a Christian or anything. He said, well, I asked him how many thousands of years, how many millions of years. I asked that just to hear what he was thinking between those layers. And he said, Gabby, it's around 2 to 5 million years between those layers. And I said, what's interesting is because those layers are so on top of the other, very well deposit, that in 2 to 5 million years, no wind, no animal, no water, nothing destroyed. It was just like perfectly in that way, and it stayed that way for 2 or 5 millions, and then the other one was deposited. And he was like, oh, I never thought about it. So details like that, we have to think, and we also have to ask people around us to make things a little bit more, make them think a little bit more about what they're seeing. So here's another paper about a piece of wood becoming a fossil. Look how many times the word rapid and rapidly comes up. Here you see some boots that became fossil. A hat, and then ham. Here, flour. We also see animals eating each other. And then a paper just was published 2 or 3 days ago, talking about a shark that was eating, I don't remember. This shark was eating this animal, and that animal was eating another animal. So it happened so fast that all the animals were eating each other, and it became a fossil. Because normally what they do when we have, for example, fossil like that, they say, oh, it was eating and it got and it choked with the food. So that's why that fish died. But we have seen so many fossils of those that it's impossible to believe in that kind of argument. See, it's eating, this one is giving birth. So it shows, and we have also terms in the secular literature that talks about something happening really fast, very, very rapid situation happening. That's why you can find those fossils like that. Here you have a wasp. That's one of the wasps that I studied during master's and PhD. And you see the wings open. The wings are open, and you see, well, normally insects, when they die, they close the wings and they cross the legs, and this one, it's open. That's the reason why we can study insects in the fossil record, because we have to see the wing. So what was happening? They were actually flying. That's one of the ideas, that it's reasonable to think that they were flying. And then my advisor in Brazil, he did some experiment with that, with cockroach, and they, with volcanic chemicals in the air, what they tried to do is just flee, to escape from that situation. And during the flood, we have a lot of volcanic activity. Here we have polystrate fossils. Here we have these fossils very, very well preserved, still having the color that the fossil, that the animal had. We have soft tissue preserved. And they also claim that those are rare to find. They're not. The thing is, they did not believe that those material could be found, so they never looked for them. And now they're saying that it's rare. No, it's not. Here's some blood cell that was found inside of a wasp. That's one of the fossils that I study, and we found this. I wanted to go and study more about those blood cells there, but I had some secular colleagues, and they did it. They were not interested in looking into this because they just thought, well, this is contamination, forget about. But there is a way to see if it's contamination or not, but they didn't want to try anything else. They just said it's contamination, don't bother, just forget about it, because they don't believe that it's possible to be preserved. Here, what we see also, there's no evolution. Millions of years happened, and it's just the same animal. There's nothing happening. That's what we call the living fossils. They just look like the ones that we have today. Of course, there are some extincts that we don't have today, but the ones that we have today, they just look the same. And here you can see the details just look the same. And one of the things that my advisor, when I was studying again in the American Museum of Natural History, he told me, he said, well, Gabby, you have to study a lot about the animals today, the insects today. And I asked him, like, why? And he said, I knew why, but I wanted to ask him. And he said, because they're just like the ones that you're going to see in a fossil record. So the fossils that I was studying, 120 million years old, they're just the same as the one that we see today, because they're not 120 million years old. Here we see not only animals but plants. We also see fossils showing mass mortality. Also, we see fossils showing catastrophic conditions. So everything that we see is just pointing to what happened in the flood, and it was not a local flood, it was a global flood. So here, when you study about the dating fossils, so let's say that this fish has 12 carbon-14 isotopes when it lived. So something happened and it died. What's going to happen? How many carbon-14 this fish is going to have? The same amount that it had when it was alive. So let's do 12 because it's easy for us to show how it works. So when the fish, when it died, the fish had 12. So half-life means half of that 12 in 5 years, 730 years, 5,730 years, is going to be only 6 left. The carbon-14 one going to become nitrogen-14. So what's going to happen in 5,730 years more, half of what's left, which was 6, so half of 6 is 3, it's going to become nitrogen-14. So let's do some calculation here. How much carbon-14 the fish had when it was dead? 12. How much was left? 3. So we have here how long it takes to transform carbon-14 to nitrogen-14, 5,730 years. So when we do some math here, you have around 11,460 years. So this is just an idea how the process worked. So some of the questions: what was the amount? What was the initial amount of carbon-14? No scientists were there to count. That's an estimate. That's what they think. That's what they believe it was, the number. They also believe that nothing changed in the whole universe. Because, for example, if you have more protection of the Earth, you're going to have less X-ray coming, which is going to have a different amount of isotopes in the Earth. If you don't have a lot of protection, what's going to happen? You're going to have more X-ray. You're going to have a different number of isotopes in the Earth, and that's going to impact the number of carbon-14 in the animal. The second question is, how do we know that 5,730 years was always constant? It was always the same amount. We don't know. That also, it's an assumption made in in a calculation. How do we know that any carbon-14 was added or subtracted, or even nitrogen was added or subtracted? We don't know. It's possible that a lot of those things happen because even in their numbers, it comes like millions of years. So in millions of years, many things can happen. But they only take this number as constant and it never change. So how can we do the right calculation if no scientist knows the answer for those three questions? And the question for this is, we don't know how to do this calculation. This calculation is based on a lot of assumptions. And when we go and we test this idea, for example, this lava, when they sent that to a lab, it came a result of 340,000 to 2.8 million of years, when the actual age was less than 12 years at that time. Here, the same thing they did with this one, and it was around, they sent the results back the lab, and it was 270,000 to 3.5 million years, when it was actually less than 50 years old. So from the rocks of known age, the dating methods do not work. And here it's two examples, which you're going to have, we can have so many other examples. So they want to apply the rocks of known age, the dating method doesn't work. When you go to the rocks they don't even know the age, they assume that it works. That it's very inconsistent. So what you see here is that in what we see in paleontology and geology actually confirms God's word. Thank you very much for your attention and for staying with us today.